It's not in the face! Thank you.
I'm on here with Stephen Espinoza, the former head of Showtime Sports, here to talk, I guess, a bunch of stuff, because there's so much crap happening in boxing and MMA and everything right now. So perfect to get in touch. First, one thing I want to say is I'm not going to go over your complete history in Showtime, because you did an amazing interview with Showtime Boxing at the end. And they did such a good job on that. Why would I repeat that stuff? So if people are interested, I think it's episode 37 of Showtime Boxing. Look that up and listen to it, because it goes through his career at Showtime, the best fights. It's a fascinating journey through Showtime Sports. But since I have you on here, I want to take advantage of the time we have to ask you just a bunch, basically nonsense questions. But first of all, I guess the question a lot of people have: what are you doing now?
Well, the partial answer is, waiting out my non-compete, which obviously limits what I can do.
Does the FTC change that at all? The new ruling? Does the new ruling make FTC,
it? It looks like there's 120 days, so before a rule goes into effect, so it doesn't help me that much. But it's a nice break, and I am permitted to do some things, and I am working with PBC. Supervising their television production, so supervising both the live telecast and their shoulder programming, which gives me an opportunity to plug it. Today's the 24th, and the Canelo Munguia shoulder programming called Gloves Off is live today. We did 2 episodes of that series for the first pay-per-view for the Zoo Fundora, and 2 more episodes dropping today on Prime Video.
Okay, and then after that, June is the next one. After that's the Tank Davis Benavidez double feature, double co-main, right?
Correct.
And then do you have anything booked after that? I can't remember right now. There's so much.
No, nothing formal. A lot of stuff being sort of discussed and penciled, but in terms of firm definitive events, just June 15th.
Okay. So, and then I guess we'll go to Amazon and say that my next question, because a lot of people are going to bring us again. What happened to Showtime Boxing? Really, that's the only Showtime question I think I'll go about your. Well, I guess I have some other ones, but
it's all fair game,
But no, but it's the rumor mill on Twitter. I mean, how does it feel that you drove Showtime Boxing into ground, according to the people on Twitter? That you personally were the one that put the end of the history Showtime Boxing.
Yeah, it clearly isn't that simple. Because I get it. From a boxing fan perspective, and even for those of us who work within, it was at times surprising, baffling, mysterious decision, because we were in the midst of a very, very strong run, and not just in 2023, but I would say, coming out of the pandemic, we'd had, a few very strong years, and really 2023, arguably the best year in Showtime history. But, the way to look at it is in the grander scheme of things, because this wasn't a boxing decision. The network, in the midst of a lot of transformation, a lot of pressures within the media industry, made some strategic choices. There'd been a merger just a couple years before between, obviously with, Viacom and CBS Showtime. The company became Paramount Global. They've got some changes in leadership. There's some business pressures, and there's strategic decisions being made. And one of those decisions that directly impacted, a lot of people was some programming decisions to really take Showtime to a much narrower amount of programming. So it wasn't just the boxing that was, that was sort of eliminated. Obviously MMA was eliminated as well with the sale of Bellator. Other sports programming inside the NFL first was, went over to Paramount Plus, and then was eliminated from all the Paramount platforms altogether. Documentaries, both sports and non-sports, unscripted programming was largely eliminated. So really what it was, to the boxing fans, it seems like a boxing decision. But if you look at overall the programming, there were a lot of things that were very popular that were eliminated, because in the long run, there were strategic decisions made about what they wanted the network and the programming service to look like in the long run.
Couple things about that. One is I heard that I guess one of the supposedly, and I don't know if this is true, I'm not like I'm inside the boardroom, but one of the decisions on boxing was not that it wasn't profitable per se, but that it was the variable revenues was very, it didn't look good on the bottom line, that they had no way to pencil in what it's going to do this year for the, for it, because it fluctuates so much based on who's available and what fights happen. And the other one I heard, before you answer that, the other thing I would like you to talk about is how well did boxing do on Showtime? Because I had heard in the past that it was a major driver of subscriptions, actually, compared to HBO. It did not drive subscriptions, but for Showtime, it was a major driver.
Yeah. The first question, without getting too far into P&Ls and stuff that's going to make people's eyes glaze over, the way we dealt with it was sort of different. You're absolutely right. Going in to the fourth quarter of a particular year, you have a sense, you have a guess. I think we'll do 2 pay-per-views next year, or 3 or 4. But even that is a guess, because there's stuff that comes up opportunistically and there's stuff that disappears unexpectedly. But from an accounting perspective, it really wasn't, the way we dealt with it was really, making very conservative assumptions. So the fact that sometimes we massively exceeded those is a great thing. But, for us, and a lot of people have sort of a conservative financial viewpoint, if you can't bank on it, almost certainty, you don't include those as revenues. So, certainly we could have taken the opposite approach and said, hey, I think there'll be 4 pay-per-views. They're going to make X million for the company per pay-per-view. And therefore we're going to project X amount of revenues. That me personally, and more importantly, the people who did the finances there, that wasn't the view they wanted to take. That wasn't the approach, because it's just too much risk there. We booked what we could safely project conservatively. And if we over delivered, then fantastic. But there was really little downside risk. And then the second one, remind me your second point.
Oh, did that for Showtime, that boxing was a major driver of subscriptions.
That is absolutely the case. I mean, if we look at a variety of different metrics, if it's sort of there's the whole science around, for streaming services and subscription services about attribution and acquisition and customer retention, and it's only gotten more complex. And as we get more data with streaming and the ability to really drill down on individual viewers and their decisions. But if we look at, sign up days, or sign up periods, every year pretty consistently, somewhere 40 to 50% of the top sign up days per year, top sign up weekends per year, however you'd like to measure it, were attributed to boxing events. If we look at like the all-time highest sign-up periods, whether you're talking days or weekends, the last list I saw, if we look at the top 10 all-time, 6 of those were around boxing days. So, there's, clearly is one of the bigger drivers of signups, and other than the big hits, Dexter and Shameless and, things like that, boxing outdrew, pretty regularly most of the other things. And even, things like Dexter and Shameless that were the biggest hits, there were, if you look at, specific weekends, and time periods, it's really neck and neck. Now, the difference is, Dexter's got 10 weeks and 10 episodes, and, boxing event, the big one is one weekend. But if you look at over the year, yes, boxing all the way through the end of 2023 was a major driver of subscriptions.
Is it fair to say that there's a kind of like, on the subscription channels like HBO and Showtime and now I guess Netflix, that there's shows that would never do well on a mainstream network because it doesn't get mass audience, but so many people are willing to pay for it. It's a big hit for those subscriptions. Like Dexter probably fits that mold. But you look at boxing, are there stars that maybe don't drive pay-per-views that people ignore? That are there. Maybe I always think there's someone at the lighter class that can't sell a pay-per-view, wouldn't do huge business on CBS or ABC or some network, but they're well known enough that you know that they drive subscriptions. That people, the hardcore boxing fans, will pay for a network to watch that guy.
It's a really interesting question. The subscription drivers generally lined up with your major pay-per-view draws. If you're going to sign up for Showtime specifically to see Tank Davis, you probably were enough of a fan that when he went to pay-per-view, you're going to pay for his pay-per-views too. So, but sometimes it's a leading indicator in a way. Like what we saw on Tank's final non-pay-per-view fights, the final times he was on Showtime, provided a lot of impetus to say, yes, we expect that he will do well on pay-per-view because, I think the last one that he did was, I think it was maybe Gamboa. I think that was around Christmas of 2019, between Christmas and New Year's and that was, one of the highest sign-up days of the year. And so you look at that and you say, look, he's driving business. And the interesting thing is when you've got a boxing schedule that's already pretty heavy, and we put Tank Davis on, and it says, he draws, a good number of subscriptions. That means he's driving subscriptions from people who aren't already regular consumers of boxing. Because if you're already a regular boxing fan, you're subscribing. These are people who didn't have Showtime before, and they said, you know what, I'm going to sign up specifically to watch Tank Davis or Deontay Wilder or, take your pick. So I think what's interesting is the fact that even when you've got a fight every 2 to 3 weeks, in some form, whether it's Showbox or championship or pay-per-view, the fact that you're still able to drive big signups shows that there's a lot of room for growth within the sport. There's a lot of business still to be done.
Is there any class of boxer you'd say maybe doesn't drive a lot of traffic, but is like a grade B side that's going to be a multiplier when put against an opponent? Because I always thought, even though he drove some traffic, like Triple G versus Canelo was, Triple G has an audience, but against Canelo, you knew it was going to be just a massive multiplier effect when they met.
And though there are those, and that multiplier effect is a really key aspect of it, and we've seen plenty of that recently, both in pay-per-view and otherwise. I'd say that if we had a very popular Mexican fighter or Mexican-American fighter, that was, we usually saw bumps with that. You could definitely see trends within certain demographics, geographically and overall numbers. So if we had, young fighters who might not have been well known sort of, among the casual fan, but was sort of a growing star, then we could see it in our metrics in terms of signups and viewership internally, that look, this guy is popping a little bit more than we'd expect him to at his stage in his career. He's showing a lot of promise.
Yeah, I've noticed that too in boxing. There's stars that seem to come out of left field for the mainstream white, point to myself as I say that, the white audience, because, as boxing appeals mostly to Hispanics and blacks in America. And when like the Tank Davis, Ryan Garcia fight, I think caught so many people off guard. But if you were in those communities or in, hardcore boxing ear to the ground, you knew something special was going to happen. Right. So is it kind of truth that do you think in some ways boxing's audience is kind of missed by a lot of maybe the executive suite, because they just look at what's going on, maybe their kids in the, in the living room and not what's going on the street?
You nailed it. And it's sort of, my pet peeve, there's a lot of, we're not going to call it, we're not going to say DEI because that's become, political buzzword and has been sort of changed from its real meaning. But, that's why it helps to have different viewpoints, among those decision makers who are programming networks, including in sports. Because the reality, it's just human nature. People tend to be biased. And I'm not using bias in a negative way. They tend to be biased affected by what they're exposed to and who they're around. And if your kid is playing lacrosse or your neighbor's kid is playing lacrosse, or your community is a big lacrosse community, you're naturally going to think lacrosse is a bigger deal than it really is to people outside your community. And that goes, across it. So I think, there are some programming execs, and I'm not naming names, I'm just saying in general, everybody's got a specific viewpoint and set of experiences. And if you're programming just from what you think is important, then you're going to miss things that don't touch your circle, but have a lot of strength in other circles. And I think that's one of the qualities that you look for in a good programming exec is the ability to recognize, look, what I think is important is not the end all and be all. There are other things that I may not even touch my circle of influence that are massive, massive trends. And you've got to pay attention to those as well.
Yeah. And also, it's like that multiplying effect, because if you're shooting for these, it's split across demographics, and you get multiple demographics, then you have fighters that have a multiplier. It's like an additional, you're bringing in a whole nother group of people. So,
yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting point. I think, that's what I think some of the mainstream misses about boxing. And when you see a Tank versus Ryan, or, other fights like that sort of bubble up for the mainstream out of nowhere, it's because, most of them say, look, I don't know anybody, I may not interact with anybody. I may not know anybody who consumes boxing on a regular basis every day. So it comes as a surprise. But to those communities, whether it's Black, Latino, or otherwise, in those circles where boxing is, like, it's an absolutely not a surprise whatsoever. You could have told you months ahead of time that was going to be one of the biggest fights of the year.
Yeah, that's why I can tell that the Ryan Garcia's recent performance was huge, because my casual fans have been texting me nonstop, images to Instagram posts by Ryan. They're obsessed with him suddenly.
Yeah,
and these are a lot of them are like Tank Davis fans, didn't even care for him at all, but now they're really on the Ryan Garcia bandwagon. Now with the PBC moving to Amazon, what I guess. The question with Amazon, that's a massive platform. It's kind of, I guess, Amazon and Netflix have replaced the CBS, ABC, the standard networks, sadly, in my opinion, but that's a whole different story. But what should we be looking for to see if it's a success on Amazon, and what kind of support is Amazon giving them?
They're very enthusiastic about the sport. And what I would say to people is allow it, give it some time, allow some time, Showtime and HBO didn't become sort of the pillars of the sport overnight. And they certainly weren't as active, in their first few years as they were in their 30th year or 40th year. So, look, it's the nature of today's environment, today's society, and especially sort of media and social media. People want to rush, to make a judgment as quickly as possible. But, in this case, look, it's been one event. We've got a second one coming up in 10 days. And, I tell people withhold judgment until you see, the full complement of what the support is going to be and what the programming slate is going to be. It's just getting started.
Now, maybe you can't say anything, but it seems to me intentional that Tim Tszyu was put on the first pay-per-view, because he's not as big as Tank. He's not as big as Canelo, who's coming later, but it's a way to kind of, get rid of the troubleshoot the product as you introduce it with without wasting a major star. But he's also a big draw in Australia, so you're not completely wasting him. He has his own source of revenue, let's say. Is that realistic to say that am I guess correct in that assumption that he was chosen because you don't want to put the biggest stars on first?
Well, yes, that definitely was a factor, but as big a factor, and probably the biggest factor, is that anybody who's familiar with Tim Tszyu know he's guaranteed entertainment. Regardless of who he's fighting, he says it himself. He's an old school fighter. He's a throwback fighter. He just wants to fight. He wants to hit people in the face. He wants to be hit in the face. He's just a really rugged, all action fighter. So that was, I think, probably the biggest impetus to put him on. It's sort of like come out with a bang, and Tim Tszyu is someone who we know is going to come out and fight. But you're also right. Like, I think there was a lot of concern. It could have launched with a Canelo fight, but the reality is, that's going to be a massive, massive fight, and Canelo fights are the biggest of the year, as a general statement. So do you want to launch a brand new platform or brand new order process, a brand new everything on an event where there's going to be a lot of stress on the system? And the safer thing to do is at least work out some of the kinks on something that's, a mid-sized pay-per-view as opposed to one of your biggest of the year.
Okay. Should we look at the fact that these pay-per-views look pretty stacked? I mean, especially Tank, it's a double header in Tank Davis and David Benavidez. That's a pretty stacked pay-per-view. Is that a sign of what I guess Amazon expects, or the type of commitment they're making to it, that they want bigger, I guess, deeper pay-per-views than perhaps we're used to?
Well, it's a sign of certainly of that, in sort of a determination by both PBC and Prime Video to deliver quality throughout. That's something I think that we tried to do at Showtime as well, is have deep cards. If it's a 3-fight card, you're not opening with a 6-rounder. Or
but
as we're
I'm not dissing the Showtime thing. Some of them are very stacked cards, but it's very rare to have basically 2 pay-per-view headliners on the same. That's very rare in boxing, because how do you determine the split and all that? It starts opening up Pandora's box.
You're absolutely right, and part of that is, yes, it's a commitment to sort of delivering a lot of value here, but it's also a function of the fact that there's because of the lead time in getting this up and going, and the fact that there were no events from, January 1 through March 30th, there's a lot of guys who need to fight. So there's a backlog, and I think a lot of these early cards are going to be even more stacked than we would expect, because there are a lot of guys who need fights.
Is there, Canelo is a very costly guy with Tank and everything. Is there a lot of risk put in these cards? Because we know boxers make a lot of money. And if you don't get a return, and often they'll get guaranteed pay to start off with before they get their split. Is there going to a new platform with Amazon and being unaware if the audience is falling? Is there a lot of risk putting on these events or not?
There's definitely risk. There's definitely a lot of upside, because obviously the platform is huge, and the potential is huge. But people have habits, and it takes a while for people to get used to different things. Netflix didn't become Netflix overnight, nor did Prime Video. And so, I think creating those new habits of where you watch shoulder programming, and how you buy your pay-per-views, and ultimately where you watch your PBC non-pay-per-view programming, it takes time. And again, this is going to Showtime has been a habit for 37 years. So it'll take some time. And there is risk in these pay-per-views. It would be nice if, there was, a deal like UFC, where they've got a floor on pay-per-views guaranteed by the distributor, but that's not the boxing model.
You're not getting 20 million guaranteed from Amazon for your pay-per-views?
No, look, there's risk for the promoter. There's always risk for the promoter in boxing pay-per-views.
That's your mistake. You guys are not making enough from the broadcaster, and you're paying too much. See, you got to rethink your business model. You got to tell Al Heyman. First of all, is Al Heyman a real person? Because I am not convinced. I think it's kind of a Kaiser Soze thing here, based on all the evidence I've seen. Is he a real person?
Well, in your theory, is he an amalgamation of people, or is there someone who is essentially, is it Kevin Spacey acting?
It's Sam Watson walking around everywhere. That's right. His playing the part of.
Right. He is. What is it? Verbal Kint.
The Verbal Kint was playing. Yeah. So that just a possible theory, because I've heard nothing but gray eminence Machiavellian stuff by I guess working with Heyman. I want to go back to Amazon in a second, but working with Heyman, is it frustrating that he's kind of built up as almost a demonic figure? That it's weird, because what Don King really is what people claim Al Heyman is, and what Al Heyman really is what Don King claimed he was. This guy that was trying to get the most for his fighters.
Yeah, I've explained this before, and I'm always surprised by the negative reaction. I think part of the negative reaction is somewhat fueled by boxing media. And some of them have taken it personally. They say, well, if he doesn't, talk to us and engage with us, then, we're consciously or subconsciously, they just say, look, if he doesn't engage with us, then, we're going to slam it, because he thinks he's above us or something like that. It's nothing of the sort. He, as most people know, he came up in the concert promotion business, and with a couple of old school music mentors who ingrained in him that, look, you're not the star. The artist is the star. And any ink that's written about, a concert promoter or a music manager or anything like that is ink that should have been written about the artist. And so, that's his philosophy is, people don't need to worry about him and hear him talk and know about him, what his hobbies are and what his personal life is and what he's thinking and what he's having for lunch every day of the week. He started saying, look, I'm putting the fighter front and center. That's what you guys should be talking about. Don't talk about me. And I think that should be admired, but for some reason it's
honestly, that explains why the media does. Because listen, as a part-time member of the media, as a bad member of the media, someone that's terrible at his job, I will say, I'm sure for a lot of media guys have deadlines. It's so much better when Don King was around, but even Bob Arum and Dana White and Eddie Hearn, you want guys that create quotes for you because then you have something to write the next day.
Right.
Al Heyman gives you nothing. And
Correct.
I can understand for that reason, he's terrible for a member of the media because we have a deadline. We need a quote. We need something to write. He gives you nothing to work with.
Yeah. And I think you can see the flip side. The flip side is, how many times have we, seen press conferences or press events where, promoters up there droning on and on about themselves and their business and, the poor fighter who's, waiting for his moment in the spotlight is really, pushed aside because there are other interests at stake there.
Yeah. Okay. Back to Amazon really quick. Last thing. How much, support from shoulder programming and marketing are they supplying PBC? Is it the same amount as Showtime? Is it a little less, a little more? What should we expect on that front?
I think ultimately, again, it's a work in progress. There is healthy promotion, going forward. But I think, again, it's a work in progress. So, they're learning things about their platform, about the fans. They're obviously a big data company. And I think as time goes on, you're going to see them more and more aggressive and more active. And I think, being honest, just by virtue of what a great platform they have, the scale of the platform, and the fact that they can sell just about anything to anybody, and they've proven that, I think those are all things that say, okay, look, there's going to be no shortage of marketing promotional support.
Okay, well, I'm going to move on from you, the PBC and you, and work on to I want to ask about the current state of boxing, the Saudis get involved, and then some MMA questions. So I guess first thing, how would you rate the current state of boxing?
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!